Sarah, please. I have nowhere else to go. My sister's voice cracked through the phone, the desperation in her tone making my stomach twist. I stood in my beach house kitchen, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view that usually brought me peace now felt like it was mocking the gravity of this moment. My name is Elizabeth Carter, and at 35, I never thought I'd be facing this kind of decision. My younger sister, Sarah, once the golden child of our family, was calling me from a motel after losing everything: her job, her apartment, and, according to her, her dignity. It's just temporary, she continued, her voice small and broken. Just until I can get back on my feet. 3 months max, I promise. I closed my eyes, memories flooding back of all the times Sarah had made promises she couldn't keep. The borrowed money never returned, the missed family events she'd sworn she'd attend, the series of jobs she'd quit because they weren't fulfilling enough. But this felt different. This wasn't about money or career choices, this was about survival. The beach house is empty most of the time anyway, she added when I didn't immediately respond. You're always traveling for work. She wasn't wrong. As a senior investment banker, I spent more time in airports and hotel rooms than I did in any of my properties. The beach house, my pride and joy purchased after years of careful saving and strategic investments, often sat empty save for occasional weekend retreats. Okay, I heard myself say, but we need to set some ground rules. Sarah's relief was palpable through the phone. Thank you, thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. I'll be the perfect house guest, I swear. 2 days later, I met Sarah at the beach house, hiding my shock at her appearance. My once stylish sister looked worn, her designer clothes replaced by worn jeans and a faded sweater. Her golden hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. But it was her eyes that got me. They held a desperation I'd never seen before. The master bedroom is off limits, I explained, leading her through the house. You can take a guest room overlooking the garden. The kitchen is fully stocked, and I've left you a key and the alarm code. Sarah nodded, trailing her fingers along the marble countertop of the kitchen island. This place is even more beautiful than I remembered. You've really made it, haven't you, Liz? There was something in her tone I couldn't quite place. Admiration mixed with something else. Envy? Resentment? I pushed the thought aside. She was my sister, and she needed help. I have to fly out to London tomorrow for a major client meeting, I said, pulling out a folder. I'll be gone for 3 weeks. Here's the paperwork for the house, insurance, utilities, emergency contacts. Please don't have any parties or guests over. Of course not, Sarah replied quickly. I just need some time to job hunt and get my life together. You won't even know I was here. I should have paid more attention to the way her eyes darted away when she said that, the slight tremor in her hands as she took the folder. But I was focused on my upcoming trip, my mind already running through presentations and client meetings. The first 2 weeks of my London trip went smoothly. Sarah sent regular texts, mostly thank yous and updates about job applications. Everything seemed fine until I got a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Anderson. Elizabeth, dear, her voice was hesitant. I don't want to worry you, but there's been quite a bit of activity at your house. People coming and going, furniture being moved. My heart rate picked up. What kind of furniture? Well, yesterday a moving truck delivered what looked like an entire bedroom set, and I could swear I saw someone measuring the garden for something. I called Sarah immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. My text messages went unanswered. A knot formed in my stomach as I remembered all the times in our childhood when Sarah's silence meant trouble. Then came the email from my lawyer. Miss Carter, I thought you should be aware that adverse possession papers have been filed for your beach house property. The claimant, Sarah Carter, is asserting residential rights under. I couldn't read further. The room spun as rage and disbelief fought for dominance. Adverse possession. The legal term for squatters' rights. My own sister was trying to legally steal my house. I called my lawyer immediately. How is this possible? She's only been there 2 weeks. She's claiming she's been living there for months with your verbal agreement, he explained. She submitted utility bills and mail dating back 6 months. My blood ran cold as pieces started falling into place. The occasional missing mail I blamed on the postal service. The slightly higher utility bills I'd attributed to rate increases. Sarah hadn't just started her plan 2 weeks ago. She'd been laying the groundwork for months. I booked the next flight home, my mind racing. The sister I tried to help was trying to take everything I'd worked for. But as I sat in first class, watching the Atlantic pass beneath me, a plan began to form. Sarah had always underestimated me, seeing me as the reliable, predictable older sister. She had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. By the time I landed, I had every detail worked out. Keep the papers on hold, I instructed my lawyer. Don't respond yet. I need 48 hours. My first stop wasn't the beach house. Instead, I drove to the city records office. Years of handling property investments had taught me that information was power, and I needed every advantage I could get. What I found made me smile for the first time since this nightmare began. Sarah might have planned her betrayal carefully, but I had something she didn't know about, something that would turn her whole scheme upside down. Standing in front of the beach house the next morning, I took a deep breath. Through the windows, I could see new furniture, signs of Sarah making herself at home. The garden had been marked out for what looked like a planned renovation. I rang the doorbell, hearing unfamiliar chimes. She'd even changed that. Sarah opened the door, her confident smile faltering when she saw me. She'd had her hair done, was wearing new clothes. My money, no doubt. Liz, you're back early. She tried to block the doorway. I can explain everything. I smiled, holding up a folder. Oh, I'm counting on it, Sarah. We have a lot to talk about. She had no idea that the papers in my hand would change everything. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about being 3 steps ahead. Sarah's confident facade cracked as I walked into what used to be my living room. The space had been completely transformed, my carefully chosen coastal decor replaced with gaudy modern pieces that looked fresh from a catalog. You know, I said, running my finger along a new glass coffee table, for someone who claims to have been living here for 6 months, these furnishings look remarkably new. I wanted a fresh start, Sarah replied, trying to maintain her composure. And technically, since I've been establishing residence here. You mean fabricating evidence of residence, I corrected, keeping my voice eerily calm. Those backdated utility bills must have taken some effort. Did you think I wouldn't notice the Photoshop dates? She paled slightly but recovered quickly. The law is on my side, Liz. I've been getting mail here, and I have witnesses who'll testify I've been living here. You mean the people you pay to lie? I interrupted again, pulling out my phone. It's amazing what people will admit when faced with potential fraud charges. Your witnesses were quite chatty when my private investigator contacted them. Sarah's mask slipped further. She hadn't expected this level of preparation from her predictable older sister. You're bluffing. I smiled, placing my folder on the coffee table. Remember when we were kids, and you used to forge Mom's signature on your report cards? You always got the I wrong in her name, just like you did on these utility bills. That doesn't change anything, she snapped, but I could see fear creeping into her eyes. I still have a legal claim to this property. Actually, I said, opening the folder, that's where things get interesting. While you were busy planning this little scheme, I was at the city records office making a fascinating discovery. I pulled out a document and laid it on the table. This house isn't just a beach house, Sarah. It's classified as a historical property under the Heritage Coast Protection Act. Any attempt to claim adverse possession requires extensive documentation and historical board approval. Sarah grabbed the paper, her hands shaking slightly as she read. This doesn't change anything. I can still file for residency rights. Under normal circumstances, maybe, I agreed, pulling out another document. But as of this morning, this property is part of a protected historical trust. Any legal claims have to go through a review board, a process that takes years and requires proof of legitimate residence. The color drained from Sarah's face as she realized the implications. Not only was her scheme falling apart, but she'd exposed herself to serious legal consequences. But that's not even the best part, I continued, enjoying the way she squirmed. The trust has very specific rules about property maintenance and modifications. Those renovations you plan for the garden, completely forbidden without historical board approval. The furniture you brought in, all needs to be documented and approved to maintain historical integrity. You're making this up, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone again, showing her the trust's website with my property clearly listed. I've been planning to register this house as a historical property for months. The paperwork just happened to go through today. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Sarah sank onto the couch, her carefully constructed plan crumbling around her. What do you want? Want? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. I want my sister back. The one who used to build sandcastles with me on this beach. The one who dreamed of making her own way in the world instead of stealing from others. But I'm not sure that sister exists anymore. I was desperate, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Everything in my life was falling apart, and seeing you so successful with this beautiful house. So you decided to take it, I finished. Instead of asking for real help, instead of being honest about your struggles, you chose to betray me. I walked to the windows, looking out at the ocean. The waves rolled in steadily, unchanging despite the drama unfolding inside. You have 24 hours to get your things and leave. The Historical Trust will be sending inspectors to document the property's condition tomorrow afternoon. And if I refuse? I turned back to her, my expression hard. Then I'll press charges for fraud, forgery, and attempted property theft. Your choice. Sarah stood up, anger and defeat warring on her face. You've always been like this, always so perfect, so in control. You have no idea what it's like to struggle, to feel like a failure. No, I agree, I just know what it's like to work for what I want instead of trying to steal it from others. 24 hours, Sarah. Make them count. As I walked out of the house, I heard her start to cry. Part of me wanted to turn back, to comfort her like I had when we were children. But this wasn't a skinned knee or a broken toy. This was a deliberate betrayal that could have cost me everything I'd worked for. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their actions, and sometimes the hardest lessons come from those we trust the most. The next morning, I sat in my car, watching moving trucks pull up to the beach house. Sarah's new furniture was being loaded piece by piece, her failed attempt at claiming my home dismantled before my eyes. Mrs. Anderson appeared at my car window, holding 2 cups of coffee. You did the right thing, she said, handing me one of the cups. Though I have to admit, I'm surprised you're handling it so calmly. I took a sip, letting the warm liquid soothe my nerves. Trust me, I'm not as calm as I appear. What Mrs. Anderson didn't know was that I'd spent half the night going through old family photos, remembering happier times with Sarah. One picture in particular kept drawing my attention. Sarah and me on this very beach 15 years ago, arms around each other, laughing at some forgotten joke. When had things gone so wrong? My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Historical trust paperwork all filed. Property officially protected. She can't touch it now. As I watched another piece of furniture being loaded, my office phone rang. It was James, my assistant. Miss Carter, there's something you should know. I've been doing that background check you requested on Sarah, and, well, you need to see this. An hour later, I sat in my office, staring at the documents James had compiled. Sarah's descent hadn't started with my beach house. It had begun years ago, with a series of increasingly desperate decisions. Failed investments, mounting debts, and something that made my heart stop, medical bills. Lots of them. She was diagnosed with anxiety and depression 3 years ago, James explained. Been in and out of treatment but couldn't maintain the payments. The last facility discharged her 6 months ago when her insurance lapsed. The timeline suddenly made horrible sense. 6 months ago, exactly when she started laying the groundwork for her adverse possession claim. My sister hadn't just been trying to steal my house. She'd been drowning and saw it as her only lifeline. I found myself driving back to the beach house, the manila folder of medical records heavy on the passenger seat beside me. The moving trucks were gone, and Sarah's car was packed, ready to leave. She stood on the porch, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Come to make sure I'm really leaving, she asked, her voice bitter. I held up the folder, came to ask why you didn't tell me about this. Her face went white as she recognized the medical letterhead. How did you? I'm not just good at real estate law, Sarah. I know how to find information when I need it. I walked up to the porch, suddenly seeing my sister in a new light. Why didn't you come to me? Really come to me, not this scheme to take everything. Because I couldn't stand it, she burst out. Perfect Elizabeth, with her perfect life and perfect house. You've never needed help from anyone. You've never failed at anything. How could I admit that I couldn't even keep myself together? Is that really what you think? I asked quietly. That I've never struggled? Never failed. I sat down on the porch steps, patting the space beside me. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah joined me. You want to know why I bought this house? I asked, looking out at the ocean. Because when Mom and Dad died, it was the only place I could imagine feeling whole again. Remember how we used to come here every summer? Mom would pack those ridiculous picnic baskets, and Dad would pretend he wasn't scared of the seagulls. Sarah finished, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. I failed them, I continued. After the accident, I was supposed to take care of you, be there for you. Instead, I buried myself in work, tried to build this perfect life to prove that their deaths hadn't broken me. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know you felt that way. You always seemed so together. That's the thing about appearances, I said. They hide a lot. I opened the folder, showing her the medical records. Just like you've been hiding this. Why didn't you tell me you needed help with the medical bills? Tears started rolling down her face. I was ashamed. And then it just seemed easier to take what I needed instead of asking. I convinced myself you owed me somehow, that it was fair because you'd had it so easy. Life's never easy, Sarah. It's just about choosing which hard path to take. I pulled out my phone, showing her a photo of us as kids. Remember this day? You've fallen off your bike, scraped your knee. You were so determined to get back on, even though you were terrified. She looked at the photo, recognition dawning in her eyes. You held the bike steady until I found my balance. That's what sisters do, I said softly. They help each other find their balance. Sarah broke down then, really broke down, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling. I'm so sorry, Liz. I've made such a mess of everything. The house, the fraud, the lies. Yes, you have, I agreed, but my voice was gentle, and there will be consequences. But that doesn't mean you have to face them alone. I pulled another document from my bag, not a legal notice this time, but a brochure. There's a treatment center in San Diego. Excellent program, full mental health support, and job training afterward. I've already talked to them about a spot. Sarah stared at the brochure, then at me. I can't afford. I can, I interrupted. Not because I owe you, not because you're entitled to it, but because I choose to help my sister. The right way this time. Why would you do this after what I tried to do to you? I stood up, brushing off my pants. Because that photo reminded me of something important. Before you were the sister who tried to steal my house, you were the sister who built sandcastles with me, who held my hand at our parents' funeral, who taught me that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. I held out my hand to her. So what do you say? Ready to find your balance again? Sarah looked at my hand for a long moment, then took it, letting me pull her to her feet. I don't deserve a second chance. Probably not, I agreed. But you're getting one anyway. Don't waste it. As we stood there on the porch, the ocean breeze carrying the salt smell of healing, I felt something shift between us. The betrayal wasn't erased. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But sometimes the first step toward redemption is simply being willing to take it. The program starts next week, I said. Until then, there's a small cottage behind the house. It needs some work, but it could be a good place to start over. If you want it. Sarah's eyes widened. You'd still let me stay. After everything. Not in the main house, I clarified. And there will be rules. Real ones this time, with consequences. But yes, because sometimes the hardest person to forgive is family, and sometimes they're the most important ones to forgive. 1 year later, I stood at my kitchen window, watching Sarah tend to the garden behind the cottage. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the beach, and the sound of waves provided a peaceful backdrop to what had become our new normal. She had transformed the small space into something beautiful, with wild flowers and herbs growing in careful arrangements. The past year hadn't been easy. Sarah's journey through treatment had been filled with ups and downs, moments of progress followed by setbacks. But unlike before, she wasn't facing them alone. The tomatoes are coming in nicely, she called out, noticing me watching. Want to come see? I grabbed 2 cups of coffee and made my way down the stone path we had built together last summer. It had been our first joint project after she returned from the treatment center, a physical reminder that the road to healing, like the path itself, had to be laid one stone at a time. You've really made this place your own, I said, handing her a cup. The cottage had evolved from a rundown storage space into a cozy home. Sarah had done most of the work herself, learning renovation skills through community college classes, Sometimes I still can't believe you gave me this chance, she said, sitting on the small porch swing she had installed. After what I tried to do. We've been over this, I interrupted gently. The past is the past. What matters is what we do with the present. And Sarah had done a lot with her present. After completing the treatment program, she had enrolled in horticultural therapy courses. Now she ran workshops for others struggling with mental health, teaching them to find healing through gardening. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The sister who had once tried to steal my property was now helping others put down healthy roots. Did you see the announcement? She asked, pulling out her phone. The community center approved my proposal. We're starting the therapeutic garden project next month. I smiled, remembering how nervous she had been about submitting the proposal. They'd be crazy not to. Your pilot program has already helped so many people. I couldn't have done it without you, she said softly. Not just the financial support, but believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. My mind flashed back to that day a year ago, standing on my porch with the medical records in hand. The decision to help Sarah instead of pressing charges had been a risk, but sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards. Speaking of the program, I said, pulling out an envelope, I have something for you. Sarah opened it, her eyes widening as she read. This is, you're making me a partner in the historical trust. The cottage and the garden will be yours officially, I explained. With conditions, of course. The property stays part of the trust, and you'll help manage the educational programs we're starting. Tears welled in her eyes. But why? After everything. Because you've earned it, I said simply, not through schemes or manipulation, but through hard work and genuine change. Plus, who better to help others learn from the past than someone who's already walked that path? She hugged me then, the kind of fierce embrace we used to share as children. I won't let you down. Not again. I know you won't. Later that evening, we sat on the main house's deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Sarah had invited some of her workshop participants over for a beach cleanup day, and the satisfaction of doing something good for the community hung in the air. Remember when we used to imagine living here together? Sarah asked, sipping her tea. Back when we were kids visiting with Mom and Dad. You wanted to open a seashell shop, I recalled, laughing, and I was going to be a marine biologist. Life turned out differently than we planned. Better in some ways, I suggested. We had to lose each other to find our way back. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. You know what the hardest part of therapy was? Accepting that I couldn't blame everyone else for my choices. That success wasn't something you stole from me, it was something you earned. And now you're earning your own, I pointed out. Different from mine, but just as valuable. The next morning, I found a photo album on my doorstep. Inside was a note from Sarah. Found these while organizing the cottage. Thought you might want to add some new ones. The album was filled with our childhood photos at the beach, but she had left the last few pages empty. On one page, she had written, for the memories we're making now, better ones. Looking out at the garden where Sarah was already at work, her dedication to healing evident in every plant she tended, I felt a profound sense of peace. The beach house that had almost torn us apart had become the foundation for something stronger than either of us could have built alone. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't in grand gestures or forgiveness, but in the daily choice to rebuild what was broken. Sarah and I were proof that second chances, when earned and given with clear boundaries, could lead to beautiful transformations. That evening, as we walked along the beach collecting shells like we used to as children, I realized something important. The house wasn't just my sanctuary anymore. It had become a place of healing for both of us. A place where two sisters found their way back to each other, not through obligation or guilt, but through genuine growth and understanding. Look what I found, Sarah called, holding up a perfect sand dollar. Remember how Mom used to say these were lucky? I smiled, taking the delicate treasure from her hand. Maybe she was right. We got lucky in our own way. No, Sarah corrected, linking her arm through mine. We didn't get lucky. We got another chance, and this time, we both chose to make it count. As we walked back toward our homes, the main house and the cottage, different but connected, just like us, I knew she was right. Sometimes the happiest endings aren't the ones we plan for, but the ones we work for, one day at a time. What do you think? Do you believe in second chances? Can people truly change if given the right support and opportunities? What would you have done in my place? Taken the risk to help Sarah, or let the past define your decision? Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear how you see this story.